By his second week on the claim, David Reeves had already become the valley's joke. He had tried horses, levers, and sheer stubbornness. The stone refused him every time.
6 men couldn't have moved this thing. What chance does one exhausted man have?
So he sat against the cold granite and drew a new plan in the dirt.
If the mountain won't move, then maybe the house will learn to bend around it.
Within days, the first frame went up around the boulder, and the first laugh followed from the town. They called it the Rock House. Some, less kind, called him the Rock Fool.
They can laugh all they want out there. But this stone stays, and so do I.
David never argued with them. He just sank another post into the frozen ground and kept working.
No sense explaining anything to people who've already decided you are mad and have no use for facts.
When David walked into the settlement for supplies, he heard the whispers before he ever reached the counter.
They didn't even bother to lower their voices. Rock Fool sounds the same from 10 feet as from 50.
The deeper cut came from Robert McAllister, the surveyor, who examined the cabin frame with professional disgust.
Structurally unsound. A house anchored to a boulder. You've built a crack waiting to split open.
He heard the authority in that voice. A man of maps and numbers. But he didn't know the half of it.
By evening, the town's voices faded, and only the dog remained to listen.
They don't feel it, boy, at sundown. This old rock stays warm long after the air turns cold.
Robert retreated to his office that night and wrote a single line in his journal. The Rock Fool persists.
Maybe being a fool was just knowing something before anyone else was ready to hear it.
And so the cabin rose, a quiet defiance the valley wasn't ready to understand. When the first hard frost bit the valley, David lit his inaugural fire against the boulder and waited.
Now we'll see if the old rock does what I suspect, or if I truly am the fool they named me.
He let the fire die before midnight. The cabin should have gone cold within the hour, but it didn't.
I woke 3 hours later. The embers were ash, but my hand on the stone felt like a sun-warmed barn wall.
The next morning, John Thompson stopped by to borrow an auger and noticed the cabin's warmth, long after the fire had been banked.
You still sleeping next to this thing? Old-timers say we're due for a winter that'll snap trees in half.
Then maybe this rock is exactly where it needs to be. Heat that lingers is better than heat that flees.
The town calls your house a monument to stubbornness. I just hope it isn't a tomb.
I've wagered everything on this cold granite. If it fails, the whole valley gets to watch me freeze.
Outside, the first true snow began to fall, silent and heavy, as if the sky were testing the valley's nerve. The first snowfall ignited a desperate race for firewood up and down the valley. Men who'd mocked David now hauled groaning sleds, their faces tight with the memory of winters that killed. David, beside his own small woodpile, did not join the scramble.
I've got a fifth of what they're hauling. Anyone with sense would be afraid.
At the general store, Robert McAllister gave that fear a voice.
Reeves and his rock house, he'll freeze solid by January. That boulder will drain every fire he builds.
The words carried to David on the frozen wind, but he kept his axe swinging.
They don't understand. The stone doesn't steal heat. It keeps it.
While the valley hoarded timber, David split just enough logs for a small, patient flame. That night, the cold pressed in hard, but his cabin held the warmth like a secret the frost couldn't reach. Deep January arrived with a cold that made granite groan. David pressed his experiment further, burning only a 2-hour fire each evening.
If a short fire at dusk can keep this place breathing until dawn, then the stone truly is a battery.
He let the flames collapse into coals by 9. By midnight, the air should have been bitter.
But my palm on the granite feels the stored heat. It's gentle, steady, and enough. 1 cord of wood now will outlast 5 in a drafty house. Robert was wrong about everything.
But outside his bubble of warmth, the valley had become a frozen engine of labor. David watched through his frost-laced window as neighbors like John Thompson dragged empty sleds back from the tree line. Wood was running thin. Families were burning chipped bark and green pine that hissed more than it heated.
I should tell them. But who would believe the rock fool now? when they need wood, not words.
So the cold deepened, and the secret stayed buried behind his walls. The stone that mocked them all was the only thing left that would not freeze. The moment David pushed open the Thompsons' door, the cold inside hit him harder than any wind.
Two small faces stared at me from a nest of rags, their breath puffing white. Pride was killing them. "John, get your family. The stone in my cabin holds heat for hours. They'll survive the night there."
We don't need a madman's charity. A rock can't save anyone. You were a fool to build around it, and I'd be a bigger fool to trust it.
David felt the words like a slap, but he saw the lie in John's eyes. The man was terrified. Back at his own cabin, David lit his largest lantern and set it on the stoop, a silent invitation.
If they change their mind, they'll see the light. If not, at least I tried.
That night, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The valley held its breath. John stared at the empty stove, then toward the distant glow of David's lantern through the snow. But pride held him still, and the night grew deeper. The storm that hit Spring Valley that night was no ordinary blow. It came as a white wall and sealed every door for 2 full days. Inside the Thompson cabin, the last candle fought to live. The children whimpered beneath every frozen blanket they owned.
I'll find more. There's brush under the north drift. The snow can't have buried everything.
He forced the door open against a wall of wind. The sled was empty, buried under a drift that had frozen hard as iron.
There's nothing out here. The whole world has turned to ice and air.
He stumbled back inside. The last stick of wood in the cabin had burned to ash by the cold gray morning.
John, the children can't feel their fingers. If we stay here another night, we won't see spring.
You are asking me to crawl to the rock fool, to trade my pride for his charity.
I am asking you to keep your family alive. Please, John, go to him.
John stared at his wife's face, then through the frost-veiled window toward the distant glow of David's lantern, still burning in the storm. John wrapped his children in the last dry blanket, took Margaret's hand, and stepped into the white fury.
That lantern's the only thing visible in this whiteout. If it goes out, so do we.
His fist hammered the door, bloodless from cold. The sound barely rose above the screaming wind.
Inside. All of you. No questions, no explanations. Just get inside.
David pulled them across the threshold into air thick with warmth. The boulder glowed in the firelight.
The stone, it's warm. How can a stone be warm when the fire is so small?
They're feeling what I felt that first night, the beginning of truth.
I called you a fool, David. But my children are alive because of this rock. I owe you more than an apology.
David's old dog roused himself and lay down beside the smallest child, sharing his own warmth without being asked. Outside, the blizzard raged on. But inside, around the great stone, a family had found a second chance. By the gray light of morning, the fire had been cold ashes for hours, yet the cabin felt as if it still breathed warmth.
This can't be. The fire was out by midnight. How is the stone still giving off heat?
The stone drinks the heat, while the fire burns. Then it gives it back slow. No trick, just mass and time.
But rocks are cold. Everyone knows that. How can a thing so heavy hold onto a flame's ghost?
Touch it again. Really feel it. What does your hand tell you that your head refuses?
John laid his palm flat on the granite. His skepticism didn't survive the contact.
It's not just warm. It's steady, like something alive, holding back the cold all night.
I burn a fire for 2 hours before bed. The stone carries us until dawn. That's why my woodpile is still full.
Then the whole town, Robert, everyone, they ridiculed you for the very thing that's now saving our lives.
Outside, the wind finally began to ease. But inside the rock house, a man had just learned that wisdom sometimes wears the mask of folly. When John Thompson walked back into the settlement, every face turned with the same unspoken question. How are you alive?
We spent last night in Reeves' rock house. The boulder stayed warm all night on a few sticks.
The words spread faster than frost on a bellows. By the time Robert McAllister arrived at the general store, the rumor had already coiled around every shelf.
You cannot heat a house with geology. The man got lucky. The storm passed. That is all. Still, why would Thompson lie? The man has no imagination for fancy stories.
That night, he sat alone with his maps and pulled out old journal entries on masonry and thermal conduction.
A stone that size, if it did hold heat, it would defy everything I have taught. But the numbers do not lie.
He closed the journal harder than he meant to, but the doubt had already wormed into his certain walls, and across the snow-muffled valley, a single lantern still burned in the window of the rock house, a stubborn flame that refused to go out. A third cold snap hit before January ended, and this one bit deeper than any in living memory. Men returned from the timberline with sleds carrying frost-bitten bark and nothing more. The valley's wood was gone. By nightfall, a meeting was called, not a council, a gathering of the frightened.
I was inside that rock house. The stone radiated warmth like a banked stove all night. We cannot afford to ignore what's right in front of us.
We are scientists and builders, not mystics. One warm stone does not break the laws of nature.
But his voice cracked on the last word, and in that crack, a dozen neighbors heard something they had never heard before. Doubt. Then a woman's voice from the back, cold but bold.
Maybe the fool had it right all along. Maybe we're the fools for waiting until our children turned blue to see it.
The room went still. It was a line that could not be unsaid, and out beyond the frosted windows, the distant amber glow of David's cabin seemed suddenly less like a curiosity and more like a promise. 2 mornings after the meeting, Robert McAllister packed his notebook and a calibrated thermometer, then walked the frozen path to the rock house.
I will measure every degree. If this house is a fraud, the numbers will hang him. If not,
You've traveled all this way to prove I am a liar. Fair enough. Come inside.
I am here to record ambient temperatures at 2-hour intervals through the night. No tricks.
David built his usual fire, a short blaze against the granite. By 9, only glowing coals remained. Midnight came. The hearth was cold to the touch. Robert approached the boulder with his thermometer and a racing pulse.
62 degrees. The air is 31. This stone should be a block of ice, yet it pulses like a living thing. Conduction and storage. I've seen the principle in textbooks, but never applied at this scale. It's physics, not magic.
I never claimed magic, just observation. The stone drinks and gives back slow. That's all.
By the time the sun breached the mountain, Robert had pages of readings that made all his previous mockery ring hollow. Dawn had not yet warmed the cabin, but Robert's hand was already flying across the page, filling it with frantic calculations.
The specific heat of granite multiplied by this volume. The energy stored is immense. He didn't break physics. He bent it to his will. You've harnessed density and time, Reeves. It's not madness. It's thermodynamics applied to a home.
Never called it anything but common sense. You can't fight the stone, so you learn to let it help you.
Robert gathered his instruments and left the rock house, but his mind never departed the numbers.
In one night, that man turned every textbook I trusted into kindling. How do I stand before the town and admit that?
He stared at the pages he had written. A complete theory of thermal mass storage, scrawled by the man who had called it insanity.
If I publish this, I'll be the fool. If I bury it, I'll be a coward. Either way, my reputation is ashes. But the numbers don't care about my pride, and the town needs every degree of heat they can get.
He closed his journal and stared into the cold night. The proof was there. Now he only needed the nerve to speak it. At first light, Robert took one last look at the old survey map that had defined his career, then folded it and left his door unlocked.
Reeves, I am calling a meeting. I need you there, not as a witness, but as the man who was right when I was loud and wrong.
I'll walk with you, Robert, but the words are yours to deliver.
Every man in that hall has heard me call him a fool. They'll either believe me now or brand me a hypocrite. I stood in front of the whole town and said your house was a death trap. I need to say I was wrong. That's the only thing that matters now. I called you a fool, David, in front of everyone. Now I need to call an end to that, and I need the town to hear it.
Pride is a colder killer than any winter, Robert. You are doing the right thing. Now let's go.
Inside, the hall was already thick with bodies and the smell of cold wool, every face etched with the fear of another woodless night.
The journal in my coat feels heavier than the boulder itself. It's not paper I am carrying, it's the truth I've been too proud to say.
He opened the journal, and the room fell into a silence so complete that the scrape of paper sounded like a confession.
Last night, I placed my hand on that boulder at midnight. The fire had been dead for hours. The stone was still 82 degrees. The air outside was 17 below. But inside that rock house, the granite radiated like a living hearth. I told you that stone would drain his fire. I was wrong. The stone is not a thief, it's a reservoir. The data proves that a 2-hour fire against that boulder produces more usable heat than 6 hours in any other structure in this valley.
I felt it myself. My children were alive this morning because of that stone. So tell us, Robert, does the rock house work?
Better than any house in this valley. It's the smartest building I've ever surveyed, and I was the biggest fool for not seeing it sooner.
The room didn't erupt. It absorbed the words like dry earth drinking rain.
From this day forward, I'll be teaching every builder who passes through this territory what David Reeves did with nothing but a boulder and common sense.
For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, as one, the hall turned toward David Reeves, the rock fool no more. And in that silence, the rock house became the warmest home in the valley, not by fire, but by truth. That very night, the first lanterns began to move across the snow toward the rock house. Not one family, but 5.
All of you inside, bring your blankets and your patience. There's room if we're smart about it.
They came with chattering teeth and hollow eyes, and David gave each one a job stacking kindling against the granite.
Press the logs against the stone, not away from it. The rock needs to taste the fire.
Margaret, already thawed, moved among the new families, pressing cups of hot tea into trembling hands.
You feel that? That warmth in the stone? It was there all along. We just refused to touch it.
Robert stood near the door, his journal open, sketching the layout, a surveyor documenting the birth of a new building science.
This old rock, it's not just holding heat tonight, it's holding a whole valley's hope.
And when the last child drifted to sleep against the dog's warm flank, Margaret found David by the boulder.
Thank you. She didn't need to say anything else. The 2 words carried the weight of every frozen night that almost was.
The deep drifts began to pull back from the valley floor, and with the first green shoots came a different kind of movement. All over Spring Valley, ropes went around the largest stones that could be budged, and oxen strained against harness.
They called me a fool for building around a rock. Now they're hauling rocks to their own doorsteps.
They're learning. I've already written the first draft for the territorial engineers. The Reeves method, I am calling it thermal storage by stone mass, pioneered by settler David Reeves. Not a single lie in those words.
David watched a neighbor roll a stubborn granite slab into the frame of a new cabin, fitting the walls around it like a puzzle piece.
I never wanted to be right. I just wanted to be warm. But if being right helps them all, I'll take it.
Spring became a season of stones. Where there had been derision, now there were foundations.
I'll send the report to the Capitol on the next coach. This valley won't be the last to learn what you did.
And as the snow retreated to the peaks, the rock house stood unchanged at the valley's heart, a monument not of stubbornness, but of wisdom. 1 year later, when the first snow of the new winter brushed the valley, no one scrambled in panic for firewood. Every home now had a great stone at its heart, and the rock fool's name was spoken without a trace of scorn. Robert McAllister arrived at the rock house on a quiet evening, no thermometer in hand, only a bottle of cider and a folded copy of the Territorial Gazette.
The territory printed your method as a pamphlet. They're distributing it to every settlement north of the pass.
Never aimed to be in print. Just wanted to wake up warm and prove that a rock wasn't the enemy.
You changed the way men build in cold country, David. That's not opinion, it's recorded fact.
The stone did the work. I just gave it a room, and refused to be shamed out of my own home.
They sat in the amber quiet, the 2 men who had once stood on opposite banks of a frozen river, now sharing the same shore.
I spent a lifetime measuring land. It took a man who couldn't read a survey to teach me what truly holds heat.
And outside, The snow fell steadily, but the rock house held its warmth and its dignity as if winter had never been a threat at all. When the thaw arrived, David walked the road into Spring Valley and saw what his stubbornness had built. Children chased each other around a new cabin, a massive boulder already anchored at its core. Oxen pulled another stone toward a half-built house, guided by hands that once pointed in ridicule. A farmer tipped his worn hat as David passed, the same man who'd laughed loudest the year before.
That same man once spat when I walked by. Now he touches his brim like I am the mayor. From fool to founder, and the stone never budged an inch.
Everywhere he looked, cabins embraced granite. The drafty frame houses were becoming relics. The valley hadn't just survived the winter, it had been reborn with a stone for a heart.
I never called myself a hero, just a man who refused to be wronged.
And at sunset, the rock house no longer looked like a joke. It was simply home. When spring reached full bloom, a coach from the territorial capital rolled into Spring Valley carrying 3 engineers with measuring tapes and skeptical eyes. Robert met them at the door of the rock house, his journal open to the page that had started everything.
Gentlemen, before you ask a single question, put your hands on the granite. The stone will answer better than I can.
They measured dimensions, recorded temperatures, and fired the hearth against the stone, then waited until midnight with thermometers in hand. By dawn, the lead engineer closed his notebook with a look. Robert had worn himself, the shock of a man whose certainties had just been crushed. They interviewed David for 2 hours. He answered every question with the same plain truth.
The stone just holds what the fire gives. It's nothing new, just mass and patience.
Before they left, the engineers asked David to sign a formal deposition. His name, alongside the Reeves method, would be printed in the Territorial Survey Manual.
A man who couldn't move a boulder now has his name on a manual of building science. The irony isn't lost on me.
And as the engineer's coach pulled away down the muddy road, David stood beside his warm stone and watched the path that had once led only to ridicule now lead to a legacy. On a cool autumn evening, David sat alone in the amber silence of the rock house. He stroked the old dog's head, feeling the steady rhythm beneath the warm fur.
You and I, we knew. I've been called many names. Fool was the only one that kept me warm.
The fire was a handful of coals, but the stone still held the sun of yesterday's blaze. The dog sighed and pressed closer to the granite base, eyes closing in perfect trust.
All that noise outside. It never reached this stone. That's why I built around it.
Outside, the first frost of autumn clung to the valley, but inside, it was a forgotten season, and the stone, as always, gave its warmth freely, asking nothing in return. The cabin held its peace, and David held his, as the evening deepened into the quietest night. In the depth of that winter, when the snow lay thickest on the valley floor, the rock house remained a steady amber flame against the frozen dark. Travelers on the distant ridge could see it glowing, a beacon of stubborn warmth. Inside, the great stone held the memory of 1,000 fires and gave each degree back without haste. And so the stone that couldn't be moved became the stone that moved an entire valley, not by force, but by patience, teaching a lesson deeper than any surveyor's map. David Reeves never sought to be a legend. He only wanted a warm floor on a cold morning. But legends are built, sometimes, from the things we refuse to throw away. And on the coldest nights, when the wind howled, the rock house glowed, a quiet monument to the truth that what we cannot change may change us for the better.